are and always will be sinners. They're not different than sinners. They are sinners. And they are set apart simply by the promises they made and the new life they received in baptism when they renounced the ways of the world. Baptism is an interesting event because it's got a lot of paradox in it. On one hand, baptism lovingly affirms the created order. But at the same time, it adamantly denies the ways of the world. And that's why we often hear on this Feast of All Saints the reading of Jesus' Beatitudes, because they most succinctly and powerfully show Jesus' teaching of turning the values of the world upside down. And especially that Lucan version. Most of us thought if we memorized the Beatitudes, it was the Matthew thing with the 8 Beatitudes. Luke's, you notice, is a little bit different. He has the 4 Beatitudes, 4 blesseds, or happy. And then he has the 4 woes, which I like to call the 4 warnings. Those of you just recently saw the voice of one, I translated that as look out. Look out for the ways of the world. And what are the ways of the world? Well, they first and foremost are grounded in greed, of a constant desire to accumulate more wealth, tangible material wealth. The ways of the world are grounded in always wanting to be satisfied, to be filled with whatever my desires are. The ways of the world ridicule and laugh at those who are different from us or that we don't understand. The ways of the world will do anything to stay on top, to be popular, no matter what the cost. And Jesus says, look out for that. The warning, whoa. And he contrasts that with the ways of God, which are grounded in a letting go of material wealth. They are steeped in an emptying of self so that we can be filled. They are based on a willingness to shed tears of compassion so that we can then find tears of joy. And they are exemplified by living with integrity, an integrity that is willing to pay a price, even if that means being unpopular or suffering. And so this is the setting apart that marks the saints. And we are one with them. The saints are not set apart from us as some stained glass windowed otherworldly apparitions, but rather we with the saints set ourselves apart from the ways of the world. We identify as saints. And that's why this feast is so appropriate to be celebrating a Requiem Mass for somebody that we love. So, last night I was at a dinner party, and it's a long story, but I'd been thinking about what I wanted to say this week, but I had not had time to sit down and formulate exactly what I was going to deliver. And so I knew I had to work on it last night, and so I gave apologies and said, I will be late, I'll be there for dinner, but I need to work on this. So everybody knew what I was up to. So when I come in, they all want to know, so what are you preaching on tomorrow? And I said, well, I had to give it some thought because we're celebrating, of course, all the saints. These were all good Episcopalians. And, but we're also at St. John's, we're having a funeral at the main service. And there was like, and you could feel the shock. And one person said, well, have your people been warned about that? And I was thinking, well, that's interesting. I don't know if they were warned, but they were invited. And it reminds me of one of my favorite stories. This is a true story. I can attest to it, of a friend of mine who years ago was going to do a private retreat with some Anglican nuns of a convent in England. She flew over there, and she was picked up at the airport by one of the sisters. And she was driving, they had ways to drive to the convent, and so she was trying to make small talk, and she said, well, how are things going at the convent? And the sister said, oh, I wish you had been here last week. It was so glorious, we buried Sister Agatha. And she's like, oh my goodness. But you see, the sisters got it. They get it, what this communion of saints is all about. And our friend Father David got it. This is why he so wanted his wedding to Pete to be part of the main service on Sunday morning, which it was. This is why when I met with him a few weeks before he died to talk about his memorial, first and foremost, he wanted it at the main service on a Sunday morning. So we didn't know which service it was going to be. Couldn't be a better one. But it wasn't because he thought he merited some special treatment. We're not celebrating his life on this day because somehow he was more holy than the rest of us. We're celebrating because he understood this concept of being set apart from the ways of the world by being baptized into the worshiping community. It was this worshiping community where he wanted to celebrate and bless the deepest and most profound human love he had ever experienced. It was in this community, at this service, that he wanted to have the final commendation of his life to God as one of the saints gathered together. And I think he would appreciate very much what our parish administrator impishly did this week, and when he asked me to look at the bulletin cover and ask my thoughts of it. And I said, looks great to me. And he said, well, look closely. And when I finally saw, I just howled because I knew it's exactly what I was going to be preaching about. And if you haven't noticed, you might want to take a close look. You know, there are all these medieval priests and deacons and bishops and popes and nuns and virgins. And if you look at that middle line over towards the right, you might see a familiar face in a green cope, which I think he would love. I said, yes, that's what we're talking about. They're not set apart from us. We are one with them. And you know, there's a wonderful old hymn, an oldie but goodie, that Episcopalians, I don't know if we love it more than everybody else, but we certainly love it. Traditionally, it was a children's hymn, and people probably think of it as rather quaint, but it so succinctly and tenderly points out what I'm trying to make my message to you, and it does it much more eloquently. And it will be the last hymn that we sing today. And it's so wonderful because it tells us it's fine to sing a song of the saints of God, patient and brave and true, who toiled and fought and lived and died for the Lord they loved and knew. And then it reminds us of that great variety. They weren't cut from one cloth. And the saints were as different as the entire human experience from one end to the other. It says one was a doctor. How many doctors do we have sitting out here? Raise your hand. I know we do. They're being modest. One was a doctor. One was a queen. We just had our friends in England bury a beloved one. One was a young girl, a young shepherd girl on the green. They were all of them saints of God. And here's the reminder. And I mean to be one too. I'm not getting a free card that I can never be that holy. And so this is why we celebrate this life of our friend on this day. Because David joins them as they loved their Lord. So dear, and his love made them strong. And they followed the right for Jesus' sake the whole of their good lives long. And one was a soldier. Do we have any vets with us today? No, we do. And one was a priest, Father David. And one may have been slain by a fierce wild beast, not here today. But there's not any reason, no, not the least, why we shouldn't be one too. And then if we haven't gotten it, we still don't understand, the hymnodist brings it home. They lived not only in ages past. There are hundreds of thousands still. The world is filled with the glorious saints who love to do Jesus' will. You can meet them at school, or in lanes, or at sea. You can meet them at church, where I met David Olsen, or in shops, or for bread, you can meet them at tea. For the saints of God are just folk like me, and like Father David, and like you. And we should all, with God's help, mean to be one too.